Welcome to the Retiring Real Estate Investor Podcast, where we will discuss how to defer taxes on the sale of your property, earning passive real estate income, and everything you need to know to go from active investor to passive investor. Join us as we interview passive investment sponsors, explore the journey of other retiring real estate investors, and share our due diligence process we perform to select passive investments. Investment advisory services provided by Insight Investment Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. This podcast is only intended for clients and interested investors residing in the states in which we are registered to provide investment advisory services or exempt from registration. Please contact us to determine if the firm provides investment advisory services in the state where you reside. All content on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Material presented is believed to be reliable sources, and no representations are made by our firm as to another party's informational accuracy or completeness. Insight Investment Advisors, LLC and its representatives do not provide tax or legal advice, and nothing herein should be construed as such. Always consult with your tax advisor or attorney regarding your specific circumstances. Welcome to the Retiring Real Estate Investor Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Bruckman. The co-host, Josh Wright, we've given the day off to. How nice of us. But we brought Ruben Greth with us. Ruben, how are you?
I'm fantastic, brother. Thank you for having me on here, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ruben. And Ruben is, as you can see if you're watching this on YouTube or other devices, he is the host of his own podcast, The Capital Raisers Show, as well as with Legacy Acquisitions. So a lot of areas that we can go down, Ruben, but I'll let you lead the way. Describe to our listeners your background, where you're coming from, and how you came to real estate.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So this is going to be exciting. I go on conferences and whatnot and tell a story at different, lengths, right? So I'm going to try and go quick so we can cover capital raising and build to rent and anything else that you want to discuss. But my entrance into real estate came in 2008 and 2009 during the real estate crash. We were buying units at so when I say units, I'm talking about multifamily units. We were buying 4plexes and 12plexes at $20,000 a unit. So like $80,000 for a house with a 3plex in the back and stuff like that for well-built stuff. And we were cash flowing astronomically back in those days. But eventually my partner and I split up. We didn't see eye to eye on certain things. And I left real estate altogether until about 2018, when I started hearing about these murmurings of this thing called syndication. And I was like, what is syndication? How does this work? Because I knew and understood the concept of buying large scale multifamily, but I thought that that was something that you just either raise capital for the same way that I used to, which was from joint ventures, or partner with somebody that's really rich, or you yourself are rich. But the reality is that's not the case at all. These dudes that you just went to high school with, they become specialists in operating properties, multifamily properties, and then they partner with a bunch of smaller people that, invest, maybe limited partners is what they call them. And they typically invest 50, 100,000, 150,000 or more. And then they partner with these really brilliant operators. And then they take down these massive, 400 unit complexes together. But there's no mega rich guy usually in this, you consider an institution or a one person kind of thing. But even they are very good at raising money. So I hung out with them and, interviewed them and said, hey, I want to start getting into syndication. Who do I need on my team? And they said, well, what the hell do you care for? Why do you want to know about syndication? I'm like, well, I used to raise capital for small multis. And they're like, really? We need a capital raiser. Why don't you, instead of paying a guru to teach you how to do this business, why don't you just come join us? And, we could use your skills and you can kind of help us with what we're doing. So we partnered up, and immediately I started the Capital Raiser Show because I wanted to study about the thing that I was going to do for this particular company, which is raise capital. And the show became pretty wildly successful relatively fast because there was no information that you could get for free on the topic of raising capital for multifamilies. And about a year into it, I started realizing that maybe I had this light bulb moment. Maybe I could take these capital raisers that I've been interviewing and these sponsors that are very good at what they're doing and put them together and make money, but I don't know how to do this. and stay compliant legally. So I asked a few lawyers, and they're like, just go start a fund, man, you'll be fine. And I was like, really? So then I got all excited about funds and started studying funds as much as I could. And eventually I left to launch my own fund when my existing partner reached out to me and said, hey, I heard that you left your company. What is it that you want to do? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to go launch my own fund. And he's just like, dude, why don't you just come partner with me, man? We already have some funds. We could use your notoriety, your exposure, and your strengths and everything that you do on the marketing side. We're not very good at that, but we are very good at dealing with the best and finding the best operators across the country, and we can pay for the funds, and you can help us with your website skills and rebranding and everything else that you bring to the table. So we united, created a company called Legacy Acquisitions that is a private equity shop. We invest with other sponsors sometimes, but more recently, we've been getting into this thing called build to rent, where we go and find a piece of land, tie it up for $1 million. And once the entitlements are done, we complete the purchase and then build out a full-blown subdivision, which we sell off to institutional buyers. And it's been a pretty fun ride, learning all of these things, just the capital raising side of things and how to raise from limited partners and how to raise from family offices and preferred equity and, comparing that to joint venture style capital raising and how do you do it? When do you start a fund? When does it make sense? And it's just been a very interesting ride, learning development over the last year or so too. So that's how I got here.
That's an awesome description. I have about 16 questions that ran through my mind as you described that.
I bet.
I want to start. I want to start a little bit
go ahead.
with built to rent. This is a newer concept that I've been introduced to. I don't think our listeners have a great understanding of that, but there's a tremendous opportunity. I think the thesis is born out of, hey, it's really expensive now. Affordability for a house is very high. Rents are also rising. There's this growing middle gap that built to rent is servicing. Am I getting this right from a thesis standpoint? And then please describe like the activities that you guys are doing around that area.
Yeah. So there's a few things to think about, which, I get a lot of questions from people. We've kind of branded ourselves as the built to rent guys. And, doing subdivision development in Phoenix versus Florida versus Alabama versus Portland are completely different. And when you build a subdivision too, it's also something to think about is what's going to be your exit strategy. Are you building these houses to sell to individual retail buyers? And the guys that are doing that right now are suffering actually because the prices of houses are going down. Whereas on the build to rent side, when you're putting together a community, renting them out, and then selling the entire thing off to an institution, those guys are just like blowing up right now. It's completely different trends. And you think that, hey, a subdivision is a subdivision, right? No, it's depending on what you're trying to do, it's going to be completely different how much money you're going to make for your investors doing these things. So on the, like scaling and putting together a subdivision side, these people that are suffering, it's because, why would a retail buyer, a home buyer, take down a house right now when they can just wait 6 months and buy the same thing for $50,000 less? So if they're tired of living in an apartment that's got a unit above them, below them, to the left of them, and to the right of them, and then across the hallway from them too, they're probably going to want to live in a house. And if they want to live in a house, it's got a doggy door, a backyard, a driveway, they're probably going to go and rent from me, which is going to increase the price on rents, the demand for rents, which is going to make institutional buyers even that much more interested in purchasing what we call horizontal multifamily. So even though these houses are detached, we consider them multifamily because they're all in one place. We have one leasing agent, one property manager to do the whole thing. And then you can do things at scale and have like a bunch of, appliances that are identical going into the same building so that you can keep them identical. But it's a very, very cool thing. And we typically do these through 506C, which allows us to talk about this stuff on podcasts, relatively safely without violating any securities laws. And we can basically tell, hey, we project people that we can double their money in 3 to 5 years, which is, the same, if not better, than a lot of our multifamily value add sponsor friends and buddies that are doing similar things in this industry.
When you look at this
Do
side
you have
by
more
side,
questions about?
oh yeah, when you when you look at this side by side with multifamily, is there even any comparison at this point when you start to pencil out a deal for on the multifamily side? You mentioned value add, possibly comparing it to build for rent. Is it even close?
Right now, once again, it goes back to market and a person's ability to take down deals at value, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people in the multifamily value add industry across the country are struggling to find deals that pencil right now. But there's
Mm-hmm.
some select operators that are still crushing the space. My friends in Arizona, Rise 48, or they're still getting like 60% returns year over year. It's just insane what they do. But that's not common, I don't think, as much as it was, 5, 10 years, or maybe 5 years ago when it was blowing up. And it's getting harder because there's a lot more people entering the space too.
Mm-hmm.
So what I see a lot of people that have been very excited about value add, what they're doing is kind of moving into sub niches, right? They're going into assisted living or heavy lift or development or something that's still multifamily or a similar play, but kind of offers a little bit better returns than, and it's a little bit less challenging to take down deals and get deals to pencil than it is in your traditional 200 unit value add B class in, middle America and the Sun Belt region. So I would say right now, built to rent is probably a little sexier, but, people will still always tell you, hey, it's a different risk profile, man. Like, what happens if the lenders disappear or they do something like they did in 2008, where all of a sudden, all these buildings that are around the city of Phoenix, they just stop being built in the middle of construction. So that is a serious concern. And I can understand why, because, lenders are not performing the same way that they were just even at the beginning of 2022. Things have changed significantly. So yes, I would say that build to rent is a very sexy vehicle right now, but there's certain headwinds that are working against us in the lending kind of range, just like the same thing as value add multifamily syndication.
Is inflation still a big concern here in supply chain when you think about that's got to be part of the risk profile, right? As we talk about the construction and getting to completed units, is that the biggest risk that we're looking at in conjunction with the lending environment?
I don't know that it's that big of a risk. I
Mm,
mean, concrete is up, lumber is down, the price
mm,
of gasoline is up, and that transports materials to your site. But for the most part, I would say the lending is a lot more intense than dealing
mm,
with supply chain issues for us. And then, like when you have a really sophisticated builder and a good underwriter that does things conservatively, and if you can find some kind of a lender like Arbor or Lumint or somebody that can actually get you across the finish line without going too low on your total loan to cost, you can make things, pencil in this industry pretty easily. But one of the things that, I should have kind of gone into further is like we buy land in cities and secondary and tertiary markets where it's cheap, it's very easy to build on, and the cities are favorable in terms of government and politics, and they also want to provide housing and they want to grow their own cities, so they get you across the finish line very quickly. Where you compare
mm,
that to a city like Phoenix or Atlanta or Dallas, there's a lot more red tape and bureaucracy that you have to deal with. And if you are raising money from the moment that you are starting to take down the land and entitle it, you're already at disadvantage as a syndicator, because one of the main things that we want to do is get our investor money back as quickly as possible. So a lot of times we take down the land and we handle some of the so-called risk by basically getting it entitled and getting it to the point where it's shovel ready by the time that we're accepting investor capital. So that way
mm.
we can build
Oh,
these suckers and then have the money back and returned to our investors, our limited partners, within 24 to 36 months, whenever possible. And of course, we're going to underwrite these things as if we're going to be stuck with them for 5 to 10 years just to be safe. But the reality is, internally within our business, we think that we can build these things at 10 to 15 per month and start another 10 to 15 every month and get these whole subdivisions built in about 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that, as you described, the business case is to churn capital and redeploy, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world in this environment to hold these and to use them as
Yeah.
a great inflation hedge. Correct.
Listen, our company is called Legacy Acquisitions, and we understand that we want to hold on to these things as long as possible. I mean, some of these we want to just keep ourselves. And if the investors don't want to stay in for a long time, we're happy to buy them out and keep these things. There is one of our deals right now. It's 154 unit. It's in an opportunity zone, which means that if you are in there for 10 years, your taxes are eliminated completely. But we're probably not going to do it because we're not going to do the opportunity zone in an opportunity zone because people want their money back in 5 years. So what's probably going to end up happening there is we're going to return all the investor capital and then just keep it for ourselves and eliminate all of our own taxes, or as much as we can in that kind of a situation. So we'll see how that goes, but it's still very lucrative, even for the people that are in and out in 3 to 5 years, even if they don't take advantage of the opportunity zone.
Gotcha. You started answering the question I was going to ask. I wanted you to sort of describe the markets for built for rent that makes sense, because I imagine that some markets are really ripe for this, others are probably not as attractive.
So I hear different murmurings, and we got a lot of people asking us to raise capital for them in Kansas City and some other places. And I'm not saying that doesn't make sense. Portland, even, believe it or not, I found this out. I didn't know this, because you think of the West Coast and you think of rent control, but what I didn't realize is that brand new buildings don't have rent control. They have to be like 15 years or older in order to qualify for rent control. So you can charge whatever you want to, and all these millennials and like trendy people that want to live in brand new buildings, you don't have to worry about rent control. So you can charge whatever you want there. And it makes it an interesting concept of like, maybe I do want to go into a place like Portland if I have the right business partners. But for now, we're pretty set on a 4-hour radius of where our developers currently live. And I'm sure we'll eventually go into some new markets. North Carolina and Florida are very interesting to us. But for right now, we're trying to stay about 4 hours from Lafayette, Louisiana. And, that goes into some Texas and it goes into some Alabama. That's where we have most of our upcoming projects. I think we have 4, right? So 100 in Lafayette, 154 in Foley, 220 in Broussard, Louisiana, and another 240 in Gonzales. And then possibly we just got notified of a new potential deal that one of our main liquidity partners is interested in Chattanooga. So we'll see if we take these down. But in terms of like going to certain places where, the land may be a little bit more challenging to work with, you might have a harder time dealing with grading and building sewers because you're building over bedrock that's very hard, or, dealing with mountainous issues. We go in places that are very flat, with favorable governments. And Louisiana is just perfect for that. Even though it's humid, there's still a demand for housing all over the country.
No, it's outstanding. Yeah, so it makes sense as you're sticking sort of close to that radius, because you have a friendly environment there, but those markets so well. So yeah, something could be attractive across the country, but if you don't necessarily have the full expertise, at some point you guys will. Behooves you to be more patient. So one interesting asset type, and I could spend another hour asking about that, but I did want to pivot a little bit towards capital raising.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a bit about our friend Mr. Powell at the Federal Reserve has thrown a little wrench into capital raising and the ability to pencil deals and basically our entire economy. How has that impacted the way that you've looked to raise capital and impacted that sort of sentiment that you're seeing from investors at this point?
Yeah, it's just driving us towards built to rent versus raising for other people. I mean, We enjoy that, but another reason we are not spending as much time raising for it is when we consider how much we are going to make and how much our investors are going to make when we raise capital for somebody else, it doesn't nearly compare to the amount that we make when we are our own sponsors. That's just
Mm-hmm.
the reality. You might, if you raise $1 million and you participate in a 2% acquisition fee, well, that's $20,000 for all the work that you did to raise $1 million, which is not nearly as much as what we could make in built to rent. Here's another interesting thing that a lot of people don't really think about is when you have a $30 million value add project, you might have to raise, $9 million to $12 million for that particular project, including reserves and everything it costs to rehabilitate this property. In the build to rent subdivision, for a $30 million project, you might only have to raise like $5 million, because if you raise $2 or $3 million for the land infrastructure development, and then by the time it's complete, now it's worth $6 million. So you just raised $2 million and made another $3 million in equity, and now you may only need another like $2 million to complete the capital raise, because you have $6 million in equity on a $30 million project, and you probably want to do a loan at like 75%. So like, what sounds more attractive, and like, how much better would it be if you only had to raise $5 million for a $30 million project versus $12 million for a $30 million project? So that's more money for everybody that's involved, more money for the limited partners, more money for the GPs. So that's another thing to contemplate here.
Yeah, that's it. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's something we sort of describe to our investors, in that as we're looking at projects for them, is you're creating economic value where there isn't any before, and there should be a certain level of compensation related to that economic value you're creating. We love to think the world works like that all the time. It doesn't necessarily, but in this case, it's a great example, right? As you're creating an economic value, you're getting rewarded for creating that and filling a gap in a market where, heck, man, people need a place to live, and they want a nice place to live, and they want a yard, and they can't buy a house. So what's going to happen? Like, you're providing a service and a product and value that was a flat piece of land before. So there should be more economics, in our opinion, associated with that than if you buy a Class A multifamily building and you don't really got a lot to do with it. Where are you putting more work in? It seems pretty obvious to us too. You should be getting paid for that.
Yeah, it feels really good to have a brand new product. There's going to be very little maintenance, and there's an artistic design part that you feel really good about. Our developers, they build beautiful little 1,300 square foot houses that like you would feel comfortable living in. And sometimes, like, for people to make money in the value add space, they have to buy these kind of rundown things that it's harder to sell to your investors, because your investors could never imagine themselves living there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing, is aesthetically it's pleasing to the eyeball when you show people the product that you're building, and it's a lot more fun to raise for that than investing into a rundown building that you're going to repair and remodel.
I've seen some pretty rough pictures and brochures before, so I hear what you're saying. That's value add. I go, that's value add, all right. Some of those are a pretty big heavy lift. As you look across, you have kind of a unique seat in that you're working on the built to rent, the new product, but you've also looked across gobs of sponsors. I don't know, how many sponsors have you looked at and in essence analyzed? Have any clue? It's probably too many to count.
Yeah, it's high. It's got to be like in the 500 range.
Wow.
500 different unique sponsors, right? Because I've interviewed at least 230 of them just on my show, and then you go to conferences and you network with people, you meet all kinds of sponsors all over the country, and then you hear about them because people are always gossiping in the industry about who's doing this and who's doing that and who's doing well and who's not, and who's going to jail or at least getting viewed by regulators at the moment. So it's a fun kind of industry to gossip about. And where do you go to gossip with other people? You have to go to like unique little networking meetings that are kind of like behind closed doors, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, man, one of the biggest things that I do or things that I'm curious about, better said, is what is the investor retention rate with these sponsors, right? So are 80% of the investors coming back and reinvesting or putting in more money into their future deals? If that number is like 50%, that tells you that the investor experience isn't that high. So, but how do you kind of look into that? Some people don't want to be transparent, and they do call these things private placements because they are private, guys. So sometimes it's kind of hard to get that information that you really need to determine, but it can be very bad for business when you find somebody who you think is spiritually aligned, they're taking care of the residents, they're really great people, and then you get into business with them and you find out that their communication infrastructure is horrible and they don't speak to the LPs and they're not available to pick up the phone call. So these are the two main things that I'm looking for, is like, how well can this limited partner access the potential sponsor, and what is their white glove investor experience? Is it good enough to retain 80% of their investors or better?
Massively underrated, I think, when we look at the marketing material and we look at sponsors, pitching deals in the marketplace. Completely underrated and underlooked at is that investor experience. So what I'll try to do from my seat, and we won't do this on every deal, but I do try to put a bit of my money into these deals with sponsors that we have screened and liked, right? Because I want to experience that. And I can't duplicate it through someone telling me that their experience is awesome. It's much better if I get to experience it. So I'll pony up if I think we've done our homework. We like the sponsor. Well, I want to be involved, and we'll try to do that as often as possible. Obviously, can't do it on every deal, but yeah, I want to experience that. Folks aren't talking about that enough. I was going to ask you what separates the good, bad, and otherwise in sponsor space. It sounds like just basic customer service would be one thing.
Huge, man. You'd be probably interested to hear this, man. We did, if you talk to 1,000 capital raisers, multifamily, you won't run across anybody that's done this particular thing that I'm about to tell you. We actually got involved with an MBA team that was looking to do research, and we had them do a SWOT analysis on our top competitors, like 10 of them. They didn't know how to find them. And we gave them a fake scenario. We're like, hey, we're going to give you $50,000 that you have to invest into a syndication. It's a fake account, and you have 2 months to do it because you want to take advantage of cost segregation and some other things that happen. You have to park this money before the year expires. And so they were like, at first, doing all kinds of market analysis and determining zoning laws. And like, this is not going to help us whatsoever. But once we gave them the list of sponsors and they went in there and took that challenge from the trying to invest $50,000, we determined that there was a couple of things why they invested with our friends and competitors. And what they were saying was, like, some of them were visual, so they wanted to see a really cool website with like video drone footage of A-class properties, and they wanted to feel like they were investing in something where they were having an impact, and the track record made them feel comfortable enough to do that. So one of them was visual and track record. It was never about returns. No, I don't think anybody said anything about returns. The other part was this we found very fascinating. So if we have an Indian woman that is looking to place money, they're going to be much more likely to invest with an Indian woman sponsor syndicator, right? So people want to invest with people who are like them, right? If you're a woman, are you going to invest with a woman? If you're Asian, are you going to invest with Asian, et cetera, and down the road. And then lastly, what we determined was, like I think we were talking about earlier, is what is the ability to get on the phone with somebody? Is their phone on their website? And who's contacting you? Is it a secretary or is it the actual sponsor? One of my friends, Zach Hadstall, gets on the phone with one of the MBA students and gives her like 45 minutes of his time. This is a dude that has $1.3 billion of assets here in Phoenix alone. So when you can have a sponsor that manages that kind of a portfolio and they're calling you directly, that speaks volumes, right? So that was very powerful, I think, for our MBAs to realize. But for us, like, it was very interesting to see that this was an emotional thing. People were like freaking out about how it's not all like logistics and hypotheticals and returns. It's more like, hey, am I solving some kind of emotional problem? And what is the emotional feeling that I get from somebody's website and from talking to them? So that was very fascinating.
It's amazing. I look at this as we have sort of a perspective that's broader on more investments outside of real estate. And when I hear things like this, I'm kind of nodding my head. It's investor psychology is the same across all of these assets and across all of these decisions they make. And I try to prep folks that come to us, new clients that come to us and say, we're going to go make a big decision. You're going to start with financials, but you're going to go quickly to emotions. And I almost try to pre-preface that with folks like, here's what's going to happen to you. You may not be ready for it. The emotions that you'll feel making these decisions, but they're coming. And so you got to be careful, because inside of what you described there, Ruben, I see some biases that occur that could lead you down a path that may not be the most optimal decision. So we're trying our best to I want to show people you are biased. I'm biased. We're all biased. Make a note of it. And then let's work on this criteria to make this decision, and know that we're going to feel some things that it's going to get weird. It's going to get weird writing big checks and sending wires and you're making in some cases here 10, 20-year decisions or longer when you make some of these choices. So it is important. And it's going to make you feel weird. And so it's interesting that you played that experiment out almost perfectly to as exactly the way that we watch investors behave now.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, man. I'll never forget that.
What an awesome activity to let you run. Oh man, this has been great. I want to be respectful of your time. Is there two last questions? One, is there any hobbies or things that you love doing in your free time, if you get free time?
So I love snowboarding. I love travel, although I haven't done much of those over the last couple of years. But throughout my life, those have both been pretty big for me. I have a friend that lives in the Gallatin Gateway, which is just south of Big Sky, Montana, and she's got like this a restaurant slash, kind of. It's got like 22 cabins, and in the summertime it's totally packed. But I go in the winter when it's completely dead and get to stay there for free. And shout out Morgan Linsenmeyer, love spending time with you up there. But that's it, so snowboarding, travel. I love to go into Mexico and get me some good tacos.
Oh,
they're kind of hard to find in the United States sometimes, but beaches, cenotes, and crystal blue waters, and hanging out with my dogs. I have 4 German Shepherd dogs that are in the room with me right now. So those are kind of my main gigs.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, hopefully some more travel in the future. All right, last question. Is there any give our listeners a little bit of call it homework or advice to take away? Is there a book, a website, a process, a tool, something that you've discovered, say recently, that's really been beneficial to say your life, wellness, etc., that our listeners really need to check out?
Maybe a couple things, right? So one, go out and network and make friends and build your network as big as possible without trying to sell anything. So that would be my biggest piece of homework. And then let's see, what else could you guys do? I mean, in terms of personal advice, I'm not one to give a lot of advice, but I would invite you to go check out some people, their podcasts, their audios, their books, people like Wayne Dyer or Tony Robbins, or any personal development thought leader that resonates with you. And when you are stressed out, plug in Dr. Wayne Dyer and have him talk about creating and manifesting peace into your life. It's just very soothing for somebody that's in a high stress kind of environment. And I would invite you guys to go check out Wayne Dyer. He's one of my favorites and my go-to guy.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to link a couple of those in the show notes so folks can go and track that down. Put something on when you're not feeling so hot. Make you feel a little bit better. And what a great point to go out and just meet people and be very authentic about it and have some fun with it. This is fun, right? Like, I'm having a good time and it's benefiting our clients, customers. We make a couple bucks off of it too, and it's all good, and everyone's having a great time. So have folks go out and do that. All right, one last question. Where can people go learn more
Sure.
about you? Where can they go listen to obviously the Capital Raiser show?
Yeah. Capital Raiser Show. If you want to learn about real estate investing and, primarily about the raising capital side of that business, particular for commercial real estate syndication, that's a great place. Or if you just want to hang out and kind of do some networking, LinkedIn is a phenomenal place to do that, where we don't have anything for sale there either. We're just kind of hanging out and adding value whenever we can.
Oh, that's awesome. Ruben, again, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a
Really
blast.
appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening.